Going to talk about our new National Road Safety Strategy, which has just begun. So basically what we're doing is trying to bring together all the relevant stakeholders from the emergency services, to the police, the public transport unit, everybody, to bring them all into the room so we can talk about our road safety initiative and how we can move it forward. So we're going to have a series of talks, and we're going to have a series of roundtable discussions, and we're bringing an international speaker who's an expert on these type of strategies, and he's going to help guide the program and help guide us along the process to help us move forward so we're not reinventing the wheel, and we're actually doing something that'll be relevant for the Cayman Islands now and in the future.
The conference will take place from the 29th of October to the 1st of November at the Ritz-Carlton Grand Cayman. The event is open to all government departments, road safety stakeholders, and the public. Registration is free with limited space. Persons interested in taking part can email sheena.ebanks@nra.ky or call 946-7780. In other news, the Elections Office reminds us that a mobile voting service will be available for the upcoming referendum. In cases where a registered voter on the official register of electors is unable or unlikely to be able to go in person to the polling station, that voter can request mobile voting. Postal ballots are not permitted for persons who will be physically in the Cayman Islands on referendum day. The following individuals qualify for mobile voting: those who are or are likely to be in hospital, rest homes, or similar institution on referendum day, or who are geriatrics at home; those who are blind or have any other physical incapacity or are unable to go in person to the polling station or are unable to go unaided; those who are unable to go in person to the polling station because of the general nature of their work. For persons working during referendum day, e.g. there's people who are working the polling staff, the police, medical personnel, etc., and they may vote early. Persons who want to find out more about mobile voting should visit www.elections.ky. The mobile voting teams will visit persons whose applications are approved during the week before the referendum to allow the individual to vote at their nominated location. In our final story, civil servants dressed in pink today to help raise awareness of breast cancer in the Cayman Islands. The event was part of fundraising activities for Breast Cancer Awareness Month, organized by the Lions Club of Tropical Gardens. Deputy Governor Franz Manderson joined organizers, civil servants, breast cancer survivors, and the Lions Club of Tropical Gardens mascot, the Pink Warrior, played Lion D. Mai. CIGTV spoke to breast cancer survivor Deborah Ebanks about her feelings representing other breast cancer survivors at the event.
For me personally, I am a survivor, a 3-year survivor, so it is very touching. As a matter of fact, I'm feeling very emotional today. We are very thankful and grateful to everyone that has supported us as survivors of breast cancer, and we commend the Lions Club of Tropical Gardens for all the hard work they have been doing over the last 22 years for bringing the awareness. Awareness is key because early detection do save lives. My message to everyone, not only women, because men can get breast cancer as well, to monitor yourselves, and if there are any changes in your body, to act on them immediately, because like it says, early detection do save lives, and you're the best bet to know the changes in you. So don't delay. Any little thing you may think is minor, just check it out. Just go and have it checked out.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Ms. Ebanks urged men and women to engage in regular exams. The last clinic of Breast Cancer Awareness Month is coming up in Northside next Tuesday. For more information about breast cancer, visit www.lctgbreastcancerawareness.com. Turning now to stories making news headlines at Radio Cayman, the deadline to nominate someone for achievement in the arts, culture, and heritage of the Cayman Islands is less than a week away. CNCF is gearing up to celebrate the 30th Annual National Arts and Culture Awards Ceremony during K-Fest 2020. For now, they're taking applications for the awards, which are presented for Volunteer of the Year, Sponsor of the Year, and the Chairman's Award for Outstanding Long-Term Support of CNCF's work. The public's being asked to help the organization recognize outstanding contributions to Cayman's heritage. You have until October 31st to submit your nominations. To learn more about the Arts Award, visit artscayman.org/arts-awards.com. The Cayman Islands Public Library Service recently held its annual book fair. The fifth staging of the fair featured expositions from and live readings from several local authors across the islands. The fair also provided patrons with the opportunity to purchase signed copies of their favorite local books. Held at the Georgetown Public Library, the book fair also included a number of family-focused activities such as a story hour, a magic show, a bookmark competition, and face painting. And for more community news, this time from the Cayman campus, work to cap and cover the Georgetown landfill site will begin early next year. According to a joint statement from government and the DART Group, an environmental impact assessment on the wider waste management project, which will feature a suite of new facilities, including a waste-to-energy plant, recycling and composting centers, and a much smaller lined landfill site is also set to begin. And you can go online to both the Radio Cayman and Cayman Campus websites for more daily community news headlines. Finally, here's a look at today's forecasts from the Cayman Islands National Weather Service. Moderate east to southeast winds and seas, along with isolated showers, will continue across the Cayman area for the next 24 hours as an upper-level low-pressure system moves over the western Caribbean. A tropical wave approaching our area late tonight will lead to an increase in cloudiness and showers as it interacts with the upper-level system. Radar images show isolated showers in and around the Cayman area moving northwest. Tonight's forecast calls for partly cloudy skies with cloudy spells with a 40% chance of showers and possible thunder. Temperatures will fall to the upper 70s. Winds will be east to southeast at 5 to 10 knots with higher gusts. Seas will be slight to moderate with wave heights of 2 to 4 feet. For a look at your daily and weekly forecasts, remember to go online to weather.gov.ky for the latest forecasts, which can also be found on their Facebook page and on the weather radio at 107.9 FM. And remember, you can download the National Weather Service app, CINWS, to have the latest weather information at your fingertips. And that's the latest from us here at CIG-TV. To see what's on our programming schedule, you can go online to gis.gov.ky and click on the publications item at the bottom of the page. If you missed today's news update, you can check out our Facebook page and YouTube channel. I'm Simon Boxall. Thanks for joining us. Have a great weekend and bye for now.
Prayers. I will invite the Honorable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good morning. Let us pray. Almighty God, from whom all wisdom and power are derived, we beseech thee so to direct and prosper the deliberations of the Legislative Assembly now assembled, that all things may be ordered upon the best and surest foundations for the glory of thy name and for the safety, honor, and welfare of the people of these islands. Bless our Sovereign Lady, Queen Elizabeth II, Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, Charles, Prince of Wales, and all the royal family. Give grace to all who exercise authority in our Commonwealth, that peace and happiness, truth and justice, religion and piety may be established among us. Especially we pray for the Governor of our islands, the Premier, the Speaker of the Legislative Assembly, the Leader of the Opposition, Ministers of the Cabinet, ex-officio members, and members of the Legislative Assembly, that we may be enabled faithfully to perform the responsible duties of our high office. All this we ask for thy great name's sake. Let us say the Lord's Prayer together. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. The Lord bless us and keep us. The Lord make his face shine upon us and be gracious unto us. The Lord lift up the light of his countenance upon us and give us peace now and always. Amen.
Please be seated.
Proclamation number 2 of 2019 by His Excellency Martin Roper, Officer of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire, Governor of the Cayman Islands. Whereby Section 83(1) of the Constitution of the Cayman Islands provides that the sessions of the Legislative Assembly of the Cayman Islands shall be held at such places and begin at such times as the Governor may from time to time by proclamation appoint. Now therefore I, Martin Roper, OBE, Governor of the Cayman Islands, by virtue of the powers conferred upon me by Section 83(1) of the Constitution of the Cayman Islands, hereby proclaim that a session of the Legislative Assembly of the Cayman Islands shall begin and be held at the Legislative Assembly Building, Georgetown, Grand Cayman, at 10 a.m. on the 28th day of October 2019, and shall thereafter continue until such date and time as the Legislative Assembly may adjourn thereto. Given under my hand and the public seal of the Cayman Islands at Georgetown and the island of Grand Cayman, this 9th day of October in the year of our Lord 2019, in the 68th year of the reign of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. Administration of oaths or affirmations.
I think before we get to that, this Honourable Legislative Assembly is now in session. I have given permission, I think, the Cayman Compass for photographs. All others need permission and have not sought permission. Compass wrote to me as Speaker, and I have allowed the Compass. So no cell phones with cameras, please. Clerk.
Administration of oaths or affirmations.
We will come back to that point later on this afternoon as Mrs. Macfield Nixon becomes the acting Honorable Deputy Governor at that point.
Reading by the Honourable Speaker, messages and announcements.
None.
Presentation of petitions.
None.
Presentation of papers and of reports.
None.
Questions to Honourable Ministers and members of the Cabinet.
None.
Statements by the Honourable Ministers and members of the Cabinet.
None.
Personal explanations.
None.
Obituary and other ceremonial speeches.
None.
Raising a matter of privileges.
None.
Government business. Bills. First reading, the referendum, people-initiated referendum regarding the Port Bill 2019.
The bill has been read a first time. Set down for the second reading.
Second reading, the referendum, people-initiated referendum regarding the Port Bill 2019.
The Honorable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the second reading of a bill entitled "A Bill for a Law to Provide for the Holding of a People-Initiated Referendum on the Issue of Whether the Islands Should Continue to Move Forward with the Building of the Cruise Berthing and Enhanced Cargo Port Facility and for incidental and connected purposes."
She said we didn't make it. The Honorable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have just moved the second reading of the bill using the long title. The short title of the bill, Mr. Speaker, is the Referendum, People-Initiated Referendum Regarding the Port Bill 2019. And our purpose here today is to pass that bill and create the legislation necessary to facilitate the holding of Cayman's first people-initiated referendum. Mr. Speaker, before I talk about the legislation itself, I hope the House will allow me just to reflect a little on the history and the process that has brought us to this point. Mr. Speaker, I know you do not need to be reminded that in your party's 2013 manifesto, you and your colleagues campaigned on providing the country with a cruise and enhanced cargo port facility. And again in 2017, your party's manifesto again, had as part of its platform finding a solution for the issues around cargo and cruise passengers. Mr. Speaker, the Progressives in our 2013 manifesto campaigned on providing cruise berthing, and during the last term, we began the work to provide the country with a much-needed cruise berthing and enhanced cargo port. In 2017, our manifesto promised that we would continue the projects we started the previous term, including the cruise berthing and cargo port project. So, Mr. Speaker, for at least the past 2 election cycles, the majority of us who make up the unity government supported a cruise berthing and cargo improvement port project. I pause here to point out that in 2013, 3 members now sitting opposite were part of the Progressive slate of candidates. They were the member for Savannah, the member for Newlands, and the member for Georgetown Central. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, their smiling faces appear on the cover of the Progressives' 2013 manifesto, which, with your permission, Mr. Speaker, I would like to now lay on the table of this Honorable House. Mr. Speaker, for completeness, I will also lay on the table a copy of the Progressives' 2017 manifesto. Mr. Speaker, everyone in this House, and indeed the wider public, are well aware that a cruise berthing facility has been talked about for more than 20 years. Certainly, every government elected since 2000 has had promises of a cruise port in their election manifesto or as part of their delivery plans. When the last government that I led took office in 2013, we set out on a complex process that we knew was necessary to get the port project to the finish line. 2 years later, in September 2015, at a Chamber of Commerce luncheon, I advised the country that whilst the Cabinet would be making a formal decision in the coming weeks, I was able to state then that the government had done the work necessary and carefully considered the information before us and was convinced on the merits of building a cruise berthing and enhanced cargo port. You will note, Mr. Speaker, that as early as 2015, I announced that this was a project with 2 components: cruise berthing facilities and an enhanced cargo port. On the 28th of October 2015, 4 years ago to the day, Mr. Speaker, the Deputy Premier and I announced to the country at a press conference that the Cabinet had considered the various professional reports on the project and had agreed to move the cruise berthing and enhanced cargo port project forward. This included progressing the work to devise a workable financing model. Throughout, we have followed a rigorous process that included independent legal and accounting experts, engaged the major cruise lines, and satisfied the United Kingdom government as well as local government officials. Mr. Speaker, this is not some Johnny-come-lately project that we have just pulled out of our back pocket. This is the result of hard work by the best professionals available, and that rigorous process has been carried through to the selection of the preferred bidder, Verdant Isle, and the extraordinary professionals that they have working with them. That is, in brief, Mr. Speaker, the history of the project. But despite all that we have done, there are a number of people who do not agree with the project and have been able to obtain the required number of signatures to trigger a people-initiated referendum to decide the future of the cruise and cargo port. And that brings us to the process that we are here today to debate. A people-initiated referendum is provided for under Section 70 of the Cayman Islands Constitution, Order 2009. That provision is not there by accident, Mr. Speaker. I am sure you will recall that I and my progressive colleagues campaigned hard for its inclusion, and I believe it is an important democratic safeguard within our governance arrangements. Creating a power that allows voters to call a referendum in this way means that no government is able to exercise unfettered authority without any check between our 4-yearly elections. This is particularly important should voters become concerned that a government is acting recklessly or carrying out major initiatives that are controversial and were not part of its election platform. That said, Mr. Speaker, the referendum power cannot be allowed to be a vehicle for special interests to seek to override the results of free and fair elections. Therefore, the power to trigger and to pass a binding people-initiated referendum is rightly subject to high thresholds. If government's ability to carry on its business is subject to check by the will of the people, then we must be sure that it is truly the will of the people that is being demonstrated. The threshold that petitions for a people-initiated referendum have to reach in Cayman is 25% of the registered electors, and that is a high bar indeed, as it should be, which is why the verification process was necessary to confirm beyond doubt that in this case, the required threshold had been reached. Once again, in this House, Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank the Supervisor of Elections and his staff for the efficient and effective way in which they went about verifying the necessary signatures and determining that they had indeed been collected from registered voters. I had no doubt, Mr. Speaker, that it could be done, despite the accusations and fear-mongering of the opponents of the port project, but they were proven wrong. The process was done in a timely manner, and the government moved swiftly to set the referendum question and date, as we promised the country that we would. Rather ironically, the pace at which we've moved with this is now a major cause for complaint. Mr. Speaker, I recognize that the collection of over 5,000 signatures on any petition is a product of a lot of hard work and perseverance by a great many people. As a politician, I admire and welcome good-spirited political activism. In the long run, our democracy is stronger if more people engage in the political process. Despite reports to the contrary, I have no argument whatsoever with the principle of utilizing the referendum process to challenge the government's plans. However, I think we can all agree that this referendum process has not been without its challenges for all sides involved. And so I believe this House should return to the issue of how the people-initiated referendum provision in the Constitution should operate once this experience is behind us. But those are practical issues, not points of principle. For those who falsely claim that I and the government deliberately omitted passing a referendum law, I can tell this House and everyone outside of it that I join the voices of those who say they wish that one was in place. For if it was, Mr. Speaker, a referendum law would not have allowed any group to take a year or more to gather the signatures required for a referendum. All of the referendum laws that we have looked at have pegged the period none exceeding 6 months, usually around 3 months. Nor would it have allowed a referendum to be called against an important national project that was part of a government's election campaign and had been ongoing for more than 5 years, and where millions of dollars from the public purse had already been spent, particularly when nothing fundamental has changed during the course of the project. My point, shortly, Mr. Speaker, is that if we did have an overarching referendum law in place, it is highly unlikely that we would be having this debate here today. Interestingly, Mr. Speaker, there is no requirement in the Constitution or elsewhere for any campaign behind a petition for a referendum to be based on truth, as it is in many countries. Nor is there any requirement to keep vested interests, including commercial interests, from being involved in such a campaign, as is the case in many countries. Nor is there anything to prevent the government's opponents from using a petition as a vehicle for their wider opposition to the government's agenda. Certainly, during their campaign, the leadership of the CPR group has utilized all manner of scare tactics and misinformation to persuade people to sign the petition for a referendum. I'm not guessing about this, Mr. Speaker. I've overheard some of the conversations. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, in my view, the leadership was downright disingenuous when they told the public that their goal was not to stop the port. Rather, they merely wanted more information on the project. Their real aim, as everyone in the House knows full well, was to get enough people to sign their petition by fair means or foul, with the hope to derail the project. And they were assisted ably along the way by an online blog and a radio talk show. Now, Mr. Speaker, now that they have obtained those signatures, we can see their true stripes emerge as they now actively campaign to stop the port project, even as we are finally in a position to provide the information they claim they need. They understood, Mr. Speaker, that a people-initiated referendum is a numbers game, and in this case, the campaign had done what it thought it needed to do to achieve the numbers required for one to be called. And I and the government, Mr. Speaker, accept that. In response, and acting in good faith, the government has therefore moved as quickly as possible to bring forward the bill before the House today. But the government acting in good faith should be no surprise, Mr. Speaker. We have at all times ensured that we have not only acted legally, but in good faith. The country will recall, Mr. Speaker, that when we announced the preferred bidder back in July, I gave an undertaking on behalf of the government that we would not move to finalize a contract with Virgin Isle until the referendum process had come to a conclusion. And even as we head to the requested referendum now, Mr. Speaker, the leadership of the CPR group have moved from one complaint to another to seek to either delay the referendum or have the government change the rules in the Constitution, no less, and in the election law that govern the process for a binding people-initiated referendum so as to improve their position for success and thus derail the port project. Mr. Speaker, this morning, the Compass published a letter from an individual who's signed as Francis Ebanks. And with your permission, sir, I would like to read that letter at this point, for I find it very instructive.
Can I have a copy? You can go ahead. I'll get it afterwards. Okay.
Thank you, sir. The letter reads, Mr. Speaker, as I say, signed by Francis Ebanks. Permit me a few lines in your paper to share my views on the debate about the referendum on the port. I've heard campaigners opposed to the project, those who clamored to let the public decide the fate of the project, now complaining that government has respected the wishes of the people and set the referendum date. First, they complained that it was taking too long to verify the signatures. They wanted this process rushed through. They then complained that the government might drag their feet on setting a date. Referendum day has been set for the earliest government has found feasible, especially with having to return to the Legislative Assembly to formalize the process. Now these campaigners, along with opportunistic opposition MLAs, are saying it is set for the worst possible date. They previously complained about dredging, and government took that into consideration and revised the plans to ensure there would be as little dredging as possible. Yet their complaining continues. I am puzzled why many of these people are opposed to a project that will bring considerable economic benefits to Cayman. They call themselves campaigners, but I think they're more aptly called complainers, because every step along the way they have found something to complain about. Perhaps it is the public who should be complaining about the undue concern these campaigners caused by claiming China Harbor had the deal at a cost of $300 to $400 million. The country was in near uproar. When the truth was announced, Virgin Isle turned out to be building the dock and cargo port for $200 million. While campaign claims and propaganda will not fool me anymore, my source for information will now be the government. I can't wait for the referendum to be over so we can move forward and have a modern port that will keep food on the table of countless working-class Caymanian families. However, I will not be surprised if on the 20th of December they find something new to campaign about. Mr. Speaker, that, I believe, is a broadly held view. Mr. Speaker, with all the efforts at delaying this process and derailing this project, CPR, Mr. Speaker, will not succeed. Even using their most recent tactic of obtaining a legal opinion on a variety of issues to do with the referendum. I will repeat here what I told the media over the weekend. The government has also taken legal advice on the conduct of this matter from our customary noted constitutional counsel in London, as well as our most able Attorney General. And we are more than satisfied that the process being followed is fair, constitutional, and proper in every respect. I will say again that what is becoming increasingly clear, however, is that the CPR leadership and their financial backers are not really interested in holding a referendum, presumably because they think they will lose, but are simply intent on derailing the cruise port and cargo port project by any means possible, including frustrating it by delay. Mr. Speaker, the government will not allow that to occur. If the CPR leadership and their financial backers, and perhaps the real leaders of the CPR campaign, really believe they have a legitimate challenge to the process being followed by the government, they should immediately apply to the court for leave for judicial review and have the matter adjudicated by the court rather than debated in the media. To further demonstrate the real purpose of the port opponents, Mr. Speaker, I note that even before the petition had been received by the Cabinet, there was public speculation by the opponents to the port that the government would do all in its power to avoid a public vote. They said we would ignore the petition and declare that the project did not rise to the level of being an issue of national importance, as required by Section 70 of the Constitution. Yet again, this was proven untrue. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, the government has always maintained that the project to deliver new cruise berthing facilities and enhanced cargo facilities is essential for Cayman's future. The project is and always has been an issue of national importance, and that is confirmed in Section 4, subsection 1 of the bill before the House today. Section 4, subsection 2 of the bill goes on to set out the question that will be put to the people in the referendum. Again, prior to the publication of the question, there were all sorts of conspiracy theories being circulated that the government would introduce a biased question. At no point, Mr. Speaker, was there ever any discussion within government to create a biased question. Quite the opposite. As I said when the question was published, we have bent over backwards to ensure that the question is as fairly worded as it can be. We have drawn as far as we could on the intent of the petition and the campaign behind it, and we have developed the wording in accordance with very clear principles. As a result, the wording of the question, as far as possible, accords with the position of the Council of Europe's Commission for Democracy Through Law in its Code of Good Practice on Referendums, last revised in October 2018. The code has been accepted by 47 European democracies and thus provided an appropriate yardstick by which Cabinet could consider the question. Mr. Speaker, from the inception, this project has been envisioned, planned, designed, financed, and put forward in the RFP, the request for proposals, as an integrated cruise berthing and enhanced cargo port facility. That cannot be factually disputed. A vote for or against one part of the project is a vote for or against the other. But again, rather than accepting what is fact, the CPR leadership is misleading the public into believing that the projects are separate. And so they are objecting to the inclusion of the planned enhancement of the cargo port facility within the question. Members of the CPR group and some members of the opposition argue that the petition was about cruise berthing, not the cargo enhancements, and that therefore the referendum question should only relate to cruise berthing. Let me then deal with that objection. There are reasons of principle why the objection cannot stand, and reasons of practicality. The principle is this. Just as the government has striven to ensure the question is fair to opponents of the port development, it must also be fair to the project supporters. This has always been a single project in which the two elements would be taken forward together. I am aware that some Caymanians are convinced of the need for enhanced cargo facilities and see the cruise berths as necessary to fund those enhancements. Their support for cruise berthing is therefore dependent upon and cannot be separated from the cargo elements. From its inception, as I have said often, this has been an integrated project, and the procurement was begun and has proceeded on the basis that the successful bidder will deliver both the cruise berthing the tourism industry needs and the cargo port enhancements that the whole country needs. The two things cannot now be disentangled. They are indivisible. This leads us to the practical problems. While I disagree, as I will detail later, our opponents believe that the government is not putting enough information before the people to allow them to decide this issue. May I ask rhetorically, Mr. Speaker, what information could we put forward solely on cruise berthing? It is an integrated project in every respect, including the financing. Just as an obvious example, there is no disaggregated financing model to show how the costs would be met, and there is no design we can show people of just a cruise facility. In any case, that does not make sense, as no one, I don't think, is advocating that the cruise berthing should go ahead without any cargo enhancement. Some people believe the cargo facility should be moved, but similarly, that is not an available option either. Nor, if the question just dealt with cruise berthing, could we answer people's very obvious questions about how the necessary cargo enhancements will proceed without the cruise berthing going ahead. This is a single, integrated project and always has been. It is disingenuous in the extreme to suggest otherwise at this stage. So, Mr. Speaker, it is entirely appropriate that the referendum question includes both the cruise and cargo elements. The voters, in deciding the fate of the project, must know what is at stake when their vote is cast. The referendum question set out in Section 4, subsection 2 of the bill conforms with the set of common sense and natural justice principles that Cabinet agreed to test it against. The question is clear and simple. It gets to the point of the issue at hand. It is unambiguous and definitive, including in terms of the consequences of the vote, and it is neutral. Those who criticize should bear in mind that neutrality means being fair to both sides. The other issue dealt with in Section 4 of the bill is the restatement of the requirement set out in the Constitution that the votes of more than 50% of registered electors are needed for the referendum result to be binding on the government. Perhaps I should not be surprised, but the government has come under fire even for this. So at the risk of repeating myself, the requirement to achieve over 50% of electors for the result to be binding mirrors Section 70, subsection 3 of the Constitution. It has not simply been dreamt up by the government. Those who accept the constitutional realities sometimes go on to argue that we should amend the Constitution to drop that provision and make the referendum a straight majority vote. Leave aside first the intent behind the Constitution, the constitutional provision. Leave aside second the need for due process to amend the Constitution. Leave aside that it is not within our own power to amend the Constitution. But leave all that aside. Instead, just imagine changing the rules right as the referendum is being legislated for. Suppose the government brought forward a change to increase the threshold to 60% or 70% of the electorate. There would be howls of protest. Our opponents would rightly cry foul. Mr. Speaker, everyone knew the rules when this process began. There is no legitimacy in changing those rules now, simply because CPR wish to have some advantage. What is even more bizarre is the charge that I am somehow using this provision to thwart the requirements for a secret ballot and thereby intimidating civil servants and others. The logic, if indeed you can call it that, goes as follows. I have supposedly told voters that if they support the cruise berthing and cargo project, they should simply stay at home. This means, again, following their logic, that only no voters will turn out at the polls. The government will therefore know who voted and that they voted no. And by extension, if civil servants turn out to vote no, they will be identified as such and subject to victimization. That's the charge that's been laid, Mr. Speaker. This is an argument that is based on a false premise. Its tortured reasoning is nonsensical, and it reaches a totally invalid conclusion. I would have thought better even of the self-appointed brains trust that concocted this nonsense live on a radio talk show. But, Mr. Speaker, to hear this paranoia repeated on the radio by some of my colleagues who sit opposite is even more remarkable. First, Mr. Speaker, I have not told supporters to stay away from the polls. What I have done is explain to the country the consequences of staying at home if that is what they choose to do. The onus to stop the country moving forward with building the cruise berthing and enhanced cargo facilities we need rests with those who have brought the referendum and who need to meet the 50% plus one target to make the referendum binding. This is Cayman's first people-initiated referendum, and all involved have a duty to explain to the public how it works. No doubt if I had not talked about it, I would have been accused of trying to hide this from voters. Again, so we are clear, I welcome support at the polls from those who want to come out and show their backing for this much-needed development. Even if I had advised people to stay at home, why do these particular conspiracy theorists imagine that everyone would simply obey my command? It might on occasion, Mr. Speaker, be tempting to wish that I could simply utter a few words and everybody would fall in line. But that's not how it is here in the real world. Whatever I say, many Caymanians will want to lend their active support to this project. They are as tired as I am of the disinformation being peddled by the opponents of the port, and they look forward to the opportunity to register their wish to secure the future of our cruise tourism industry and get access to more and cheaper cargo. Therefore, whatever I say, there will be a sizable yes vote on the 19th of December. And, Mr. Speaker, for further assurance, the secrecy of ballots will be maintained. Finally, even if the premise were not false and the reasoning was not as flawed as it is, neither I nor anyone else in the government has any interest in victimizing any civil servant or indeed anyone else who votes no at the referendum. There is absolutely no evidence to the contrary. We heard time and again during the referendum campaign from the CPR in particular, that any civil servants who signed the petition risked victimization. But, Mr. Speaker, curiously, we have had not even one complaint from anyone who has been so victimized. Nor will we. Civil servants are perfectly free to vote their conscience at the referendum without any fear of any action by any government that I lead. Next, Mr. Speaker, I want to address an issue that is not found on the face of the bill itself. That is the date chosen for the referendum. The House will be aware that earlier this month, the government proposed 19th of December as the referendum date. This has been the subject of considerable conjecture since it was announced. That is, despite the fact that I have said for some time that if the referendum petition reached the required threshold, the government would then move to call the referendum as quickly as possible. This, Mr. Speaker, was in response to suggestions from the CPR that the government would seek to avoid or delay the vote. Whatever date is chosen, some people may be away. That is why there are arrangements in place which allow every registered elector to cast their vote by other means if they cannot do so in person. Anyone who wants to vote can do so, whatever date is chosen. There is no reason to delay. The argument being made against this date is a somewhat strange one. Throughout the year or more it took to gather signatures for the referendum, we constantly heard that there was deep-seated opposition to this project and that voters were demanding to have their say. At every turn, campaigners expressed their confidence that if only they were given the opportunity, then voters would come out in their droves to vote against the port, and that they would do so in numbers sufficient to reach the 50% plus one threshold for the result to be binding. Now that we've reached this point, Mr. Speaker, there's a new argument. And that argument goes, Mr. Speaker, this way. Now the argument apparently goes that so weak is the level of opposition to the port that people will be put off voting simply because the vote is happening 6 days before Christmas. Which is it? If the No campaign is confident in its case, why do they believe that the date will make a difference? For in reality, there is no impediment to voting whatever date is chosen. Anyone who is not able to vote in person can apply for a postal ballot, as is always the case in Cayman. If any vote is likely to be suppressed by the choice of the date, it is the yes vote. I understand that whatever I say, some voters who support the port may not bother to vote, especially if they're off island, for example. They may feel they can do so safely because of the 50% plus one threshold. I accept, therefore, Mr. Speaker, that the final result is likely to understate the real level of support for the port development project. While I'm on the subject, Mr. Speaker, the same applies to arguments about the sale of alcohol at licensed premises on the day of the vote. We have heard arguments that, again, this will suppress the no vote. Do our opponents have so little confidence in their supporters that they think that faced with a choice on the day, they will decide to sit in a bar rather than turn out and vote down a government project that we are told they passionately believe will do harm to Cayman's long-term interests? Mr. Speaker, the reality is that many people will already, and many offices, have booked Christmas parties and luncheons for that day, and we do not want to disrupt those arrangements, nor indeed stop tourists spending their money here in the busy pre-Christmas period. That is why the bars and restaurants will remain open. It is not some ploy to distract weak-willed no voters, as is suggested. Our opponents really should have more confidence in Caymanians. Truly, Mr. Speaker. If they really believe the arguments put forward against the port, the people will come out and vote no. Either our opponents lack that confidence in their supporters or they lack confidence in their own case. I am tempted to think it's the latter, and that all these arguments about the date are simply a smokescreen to excuse their eventual failure to get the numbers they need. There is one other consequence of the choice of the date that has also been controversial. Section 5 of the bill before this House, in and of itself, is uncontroversial. It simply states that those entitled to vote in the referendum will be those registered to vote on the date of the referendum. In this case, that means those registered to vote on 19th of December will be entitled to vote, and in practice, that in turn means that it will be those electors on the register, on the official register, as at 1st of October 2019. The suggestion is, I believe, that the legislation should be changed to allow the 1st of January register to be brought in 2 weeks early and to allow some 220 persons to vote who are on that revised register, which is not yet the official register. Again, Mr. Speaker, I find this most extraordinary. Why should the rules be changed? The argument is that the government is trying to exclude these new voters because we fear they will vote no. If that were true, it must conversely mean that those opposed to the port are seeking to get the rule changed because it would advantage them. Once again, imagine if the government were to do that. Suppose we had been on a sign-up-to-vote campaign to get supporters of the port to register, and we're now looking forward to bring forward the use of that revised register. There would be howls of protest. The government is seeking an advantage. Mr. Speaker, the fact is that on the date of any given election or referendum, we have to use the electoral register as at that date. If we do anything else, it will constitute a form of gerrymandering. As is always the case, if you draw a line as at a date, some people will find themselves excluded by that line. That is just the way It is. Mr. Speaker, I wonder if we were to put the referendum date in February, if there would then be a similar campaign to try and get included on the 1st of January list, persons who have registered but who would not be confirmed until the new list is put out on the 1st of April. There's always a line, Mr. Speaker, and whatever date line you draw, there are going to be some people who do not meet the requirements because of the time they registered to get on the particular list. Mr. Speaker, the government has nothing to fear, nor indeed nothing to gain from having 200 or so more or fewer voters eligible to vote. We do not believe our opponents have sufficient support to reach the 50% plus one threshold with or without these votes. We are not excluding them for some Machiavellian purpose. Rather, they are not eligible under the rules that we consistently apply in the Cayman Islands. Seeking to change the law for the advantage of one side or another, be that real or perceived, would be the real anti-democratic thing to do. Mr. Speaker, just as I come to believe that I have heard all of the complaints from the opponents to the port, there is yet another controversy that they are creating. The bill, Mr. Speaker, calls for the ballot papers from all the electoral districts to be taken to a central location and mixed together for the purpose of counting. In other words, Mr. Speaker, the count of votes will be considered a national vote and not an electoral district vote. The opponents, including some in the official opposition, cry foul because they say they will not know how their constituents voted. Mr. Speaker, this is not some opinion poll being carried out for the convenience of the member from Bordentown West or Georgetown Central to provide data for later use or to help them in their next election campaign. This exercise is a referendum on a matter of national importance, and it should be treated as such. The referendum is where a national decision will be made. And what is important is the view of the country as a whole, not individual electoral districts. In 2009, when we voted in our very first referendum as to whether to support the 2009 Constitution order, that count was done in the same way. The ballots were mixed and a single count was done to determine the outcome. That was done efficiently, even though the elections office was also carrying on the count for the general elections that were held the same day as the referendum. That was a national count for a matter of national importance. This referendum, too, Mr. Speaker, is one of national importance and will have a national count. In short, Mr. Speaker, the government has put before the House a bill that deals in a straightforward way with the need to get on and meet the demands placed on us by 25% of registered electors that we hold a referendum. The question to be used conforms to all good practice and is fair to both sides. It recognizes that there is only one project that can reasonably be subject to a popular vote, and that is to move forward with building the country's cruise and cargo port improvements together, as has always been envisaged. We have chosen a date to expedite the speedy resolution of this referendum issue that has been ongoing for well over a year. And we have determined that the count should be a national count in line with the nature of the referendum itself. The rest of the arrangements under the bill are consistent with the normal democratic arrangements of the Cayman Islands. At this point, Mr. Speaker, I would notify you and the rest of the House that there will be some tidying up amendments that we need to consider at committee stage. These will be introduced in due course. However, we have heard opponents of the port arguing for more substantive amendments to the bill. We may hear those arguments repeated from the opposition benches today. Mr. Speaker. Those arguments, as I understand them, amount to an attempt to rewrite the question in what they believe is their own interest, or to alter the normal arrangements for voting in Cayman, presumably for the same reason. We have those standing arrangements about how we conduct public votes for a reason, and that is precisely to stop the kind of manipulation of who is or who is not eligible to vote that our opponents are proposing. This is Cayman's first people-initiated referendum, and it must be held in a fair and democratic manner. This bill will achieve that objective. However, Mr. Speaker, it is not just for the sake of our democracy that this is important. The process and conduct of the referendum are significant concerns, but it is the underlying issue to be decided that the nation should now focus upon. On 19th of December, Caymanians are being asked to decide on the future direction this country will take. Opponents of the port project seek to portray this as a simple choice. At heart, their argument is that the development of a new cruise berthing facility and enhanced cargo provision will cause irreparable environmental damage. There are subsequent issues, but this is the matter of principle at stake for the port's opponents. I have said in this House before, Mr. Speaker, that this is a principled position which I can understand and which I respect. It is not, though, Mr. Speaker, a position that any responsible government can take. All things are not black or white. Like most Caymanians, we in this government believe that in considering the port project, as in considering other forms of development, there is a balance to be struck between economic and environmental issues. There is no right answer to how to strike that balance, no formula that yields an unambiguous solution. In the end, it is a matter of weighing the evidence and making a judgment. In initiating this project, that is what the previous administration I led did. We assembled a business case and carried out an environmental impact assessment in order to inform us, but in the end, it was our political judgment that the economic benefits were so significant that they outweighed the potential environmental impact of the project. What the referendum is doing is asking Caymanians now to repeat that process and exercise their own judgment. Just like the government has done, voters need to weigh the evidence and make their decision. Again, our opponents have tried to muddy the waters here. We hear repeated claims that either government is hiding things or that it is seeking to mislead people. The claim is that there is not enough information for people to make an informed decision. In reality, Mr. Speaker, there is more than enough information available. What I do accept is that some of it is relatively inaccessible and that it is spread across too many different documents. For that reason, the government will be producing an information booklet that will bring together into one place all the key information about this project. We will be making the booklets as widely available as we can in the run-up to the referendum. To be clear, the booklet will be a presentation of the government's case. I do not claim it will seek to present our opponent's case for them, and nor should it. This is a referendum about the delivery of one of this government's key policy objectives. Explaining government policy is one of the responsibilities of government, and promoting and defending a project we believe is necessary for the future well-being and prosperity of the Cayman Islands is something for which we make no apology. However, setting out our case does not mean that we will in any way be untruthful. We are happy to set out the facts and to explain why we believe the project should move forward based on those facts. The case, after all, for moving forward with building the cruise berthing and enhanced cargo facility is overwhelming. Consider first the economic case. Looking ahead, there is no status quo. Either Cayman's cruise tourism industry continues to grow with the benefit of the new berthing facilities, or we face the very real risk of its gradual but inexorable decline. Either we protect and grow the jobs and businesses of Caymanians who depend on cruise visitors, or we face those jobs being lost and those businesses failing. The approach we have adopted in moving forward the port project not only guarantees that the new berthing facilities get built, it guarantees that they get used, not just by the two major companies who are partners in the project, but by other cruise lines as well. Put simply, without a throughput of passengers, the Verdant Isle partners, including the two cruise lines, do not get their investment back. It is in their interest to bring their passengers to Cayman and to maximize the use of the berths throughout the week and in low season as well as high. Without the new facilities, Cayman will increasingly be at the mercy of market forces that are likely to result in declining cruise visitor numbers. This will not happen overnight, but the impact will be real, and in the medium term will have a significant effect on Caymanian jobs and in Cayman's wider economy. Mr. Speaker, in the last couple of years, Cayman has delivered strong positive performance in terms of cruise visitor arrivals. Our opponents suggested this demonstrated that our assumptions in the outline business case were flawed, and our views on the likely decline of the industry were merely scaremongering. When it was recently reported in the press that cruise visitor numbers for the first 6 months of this year were down just over 5%, I did not hear anyone rushing to defend our opponent's previous position. Worryingly, Mr. Speaker, the numbers continue to decline. The first 6 months were buoyed by January 2019 being the best month on record. But if you look at the most recent 6 months for which data is available, March through August this year, our cruise visitor numbers are down 12.3% compared with the same period last year. This is in large part due to a correction in the market, as other destinations that were hit by hurricanes have been able to welcome back cruise visitors. We must be thankful for that, our friends and neighbors, in many ways, but the impact on Cayman is real. The future of the cruise industry is about bigger ships and more passengers. Those ships are already passing Cayman by. The impracticality of tendering passengers in those numbers, particularly when they would have to queue for hours in the Cayman sun to return to the ships, means Cayman would no longer be attractive for many cruise itineraries. As well as that long-term benefit, the short-term job creation associated with the construction of the new port will be significant. I said some months ago when I introduced the SPS in this House that all indications are of a slowdown in the global economy in the next year or so. The port construction jobs will help shield Cayman's economy and Caymanian jobs from some of the potential impact of that slowdown. The jobs are real and are available to Caymanians, as anyone who plans to visit the jobs fair scheduled for tomorrow by the Verdant Isle partners will be able to confirm. Mr. Speaker, the last economic benefit I want to highlight concerns the enhanced cargo facilities. We have to accept that our current port is too small, too cramped, and too inefficient. It can barely meet the needs of the country now, and only does so, Mr. Speaker, because it encroaches at night onto the area which is generally reserved for the cruise passengers. That area then has to be properly cleared and cleaned so that when the cruise visitors arrive the following morning, it will be presentable. That is every single night, Mr. Speaker. It can barely meet the needs of the country now, and if Cayman continues to prosper and grow, as this government certainly intends it should, we need better cargo handling facilities. This project, Mr. Speaker, delivers Cayman's much-needed cargo port enhancement and creates the capacity we need to see us through the next 15 years or so of sustained growth. there will be an increase of almost 30% in the usable cargo space. The current lack of space causes delays on the vessel operations and the availability of the containers for the retailers and other importers in Cayman. The addition of a third small berth for smaller ships and barges hauling the likes of aggregate and cement will be a significant improvement which will allow operations of another vessel which cannot be done at this time. Moving that berth out of the way of container operations allows for the simultaneous operations of container vessel and bulk cargo. The improvements will mean that the port can use new specialist cargo cranes rather than inefficient converted construction cranes it uses now. Taken together, these improvements will improve the efficiency of cargo handling at the port and will help to reduce shipping costs for importers. The cargo improvements, if done on their own, would cost tens of millions of dollars. If the Port Authority had to finance the costs themselves, the only way it could do it would be to increase docking and handling charges, which in turn would increase the cost of imported goods. There is no viable do-nothing strategy for the cargo port. The throughput demand that we put upon it has outgrown the ability of the port to meet our needs. That position will only worsen as the port ages further and our demand for imported goods continues to increase. Enhancements to the port, the cargo port, Mr. Speaker, are desperately needed. Our choice is to move forward with the overall redevelopment project funded by Virgin Isle, or try to fund and build standalone cargo handling improvements. If we move forward with the planned project, we can achieve efficiencies to help to reduce import costs. But if we try to finance a standalone cargo project, then inevitably the cost will be added to the prices of imported goods. The cost of living in Cayman will go up. If central government is asked to fund a standalone cargo dock, then it would be by taking money from some other capital project. Which one should we take it from, Mr. Speaker? Our school plan improvements, the John Gray High School, the just started mental health facility, our roadworks program. Which project should we sacrifice or slow down to be able to make a start at paying for a larger cargo port facility? No, Mr. Speaker, that is not really a solution my government or the public would accept. Neither would we entertain any new borrowing for this. The arrangement for additional cargo space, coupled with cruise berthing that is funded by Virgin Isle partners and repaid from cruise ship passenger fees, is an excellent arrangement, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have summarized the economic benefits of this project, and in due course, I will turn my attention to the costs of the project. But before that, I will address the environmental impact of the project. I will start with this. Despite the oft-repeated claims of opponents of the port development, there will be no impact from the project on 7 Mile Beach. All of the scientific evidence compiled for the environmental impact assessment demonstrates that fact quite clearly. Put simply, sand on 7 Mile Beach comes from the northwest, and that flow is undisturbed and will be undisturbed by the redeveloped port infrastructure. After exhaustive scientific modeling of the tides, wind, wave, climate, and associated sediment transportation processes that operate along that whole coastal stretch, the conclusion in the environmental statement produced by Beard and Associates in 2015 is clear and inescapable. I quote directly from the document, Mr. Speaker. There is no apparent sediment transport linkage between Georgetown Harbor and 7 Mile Beach. Therefore, the proposed project is not expected to have any impact on 7 Mile Beach. Fluctuations in the beach width will continue, but the proposed project will not cause any changes in the erosion or deposition patterns along 7 Mile Beach. End quote. Mr. Speaker, I heard some grumbling over the other side. They may not have heard me clearly, so with your permission, I'll repeat it. Mr. Speaker, the conclusion in the environmental statement produced by Beard and Associates in 2015 is clear and inescapable, and I quote, "There is no apparent sediment transport linkage between Georgetown Harbor and 7 Mile Beach. Therefore, the proposed project is not expected to have any impact on 7 Mile Beach. Fluctuations in the beach width will continue, but the proposed project will not cause any changes in the erosion or deposition patterns along 7 Mile Beach." Unquote. Mr. Speaker, that is not Alden McLaughlin saying that. That's Beard and Associates. Opponents of the project are usually keen to talk about conclusions of the environmental impact assessment. But for some reason, this one, perhaps one of the most important in the whole study, is the one they choose to ignore. They are none so blind as those who will not see, none so deaf as those who will not hear. Actually, it is not just a matter of ignoring this evidence. They seek to deny the science through a mix of anecdote and assertion. I say to the country, do not be misled. The environmental impact assessment is available. Go and look at the evidence for yourself. Just go online and you'll find it. You will see the rigor of the model, which allows testing of every combination of weather and sea conditions that has hit Cayman for decades. You will see the clarity of the report's conclusions as I have just quoted them. Please ask those who assert that 7 Mile Beach will somehow get denuded of sand because of the port development to show you the detailed science behind that claim. My only advice to you, in particular the member for Georgetown Central, he's looking hard at me, is not to hold your breath while you wait for them to produce any relevant scientific data to support their wild assertions. But, Mr. Speaker, whilst the opponents of the project do not seem willing to accept the science that indicates that 7 Mile Beach will be safe, I am pleased to advise this Honorable House that significantly, the Environmental Assessment Board has accepted the findings and endorsed the scientific methodology followed by Beard and Associates. The Environmental Assessment Board, in its report on Beard's environmental statement, said that it found the data collection and results outlined by Beard to be robust, given the timeline for completion of the EIA. In referencing 7 Mile Beach specifically, the Environmental Assessment Board report states that, and I quote, "We note the conclusions in the environmental statement that no large-scale changes to the prevailing sediment transport patterns will arise as a result of the project. The Environmental Assessment Board is satisfied that the results of the sediment transport modeling confirm or verify previously understood mechanisms for sediment transport regimes between Georgetown Harbor and 7 Mile Beach." Mr. Speaker, this information has been said many times, but continues to be deliberately ignored by opponents of this project. I hope that after today, we will no longer have people and organizations who should know better continuing the narrative that 7 Mile Beach is at risk by this project. Leaving aside the more fanciful claims, however, Mr. Speaker, the government does accept that there will be important environmental impacts to the close-by marine environment with regard to the project. Most significant is any potential degradation that may be caused by dredging to the coral in the area of the redeveloped port. The environmental impact assessment, which was completed in 2015, estimated the extent of the potential impact, but it also considered how that impact might be mitigated. Before I talk about mitigation, however, I want to emphasize the work that has gone on since then to reduce the likely environmental impact. In response to concerns in our community raised after the publication of the EIA, I gave a commitment that as we progress this much-needed project, the government would take the opportunity to find ways to reduce the potential damage. The procurement approach that we have taken means that the contractor is responsible for designing the new facilities, so we challenge the bidders to come back to us with designs that fulfill the government's pledge to the country. And I'm delighted to say, Mr. Speaker, that we have been able to do so, that they have been able to do so. The designs were made public a couple of weeks ago, so people can see for themselves. But the headline changes from the original proposals are that the cruise berths themselves have been completely redesigned and the cargo enhancements have been scaled back. Recognizing the concerns over dredging in particular, the redesign moves the piers to deeper water. As a consequence, the footprint of the new port design requires 30% less dredging than the original design and eliminates completely the need for any dredging in Hogstye Bay. In fact, Mr. Speaker, despite stated concerns about the impact of the project on Eden Rock, I am advised that the reefs in that location are approximately 2 football fields away from the marine work by the dock and are extremely unlikely to be impacted at all by the dredging. But Mr. Speaker, even with the significant improvements in the design, there will be areas where coral will be impacted by the new facilities. Here is the role for mitigation. It is not possible to move the dredging so that it avoids the coral completely, but it is possible to move coral so that it can thrive in areas well away from the working of the new port. Perhaps surprisingly, this too has become an area of controversy in the project. Coral has been impacted in Cayman before, many times, not least by damage caused by cruise ship anchors. Mr. Speaker, let me remind the House of Cayman's recent experience. There have been 2 large-scale coral reattachment cases in the recent past in West Bay and Eden Rock. Shipping incidents dislodged and fractured large sections of the limestone reef and damaged thousands of corals at both sites. Polaris Applied Sciences, Inc., the proposed Verdant Isle coral relocation partner, restored both of these sites in 2016 and 2017. Coral fragments that are broken and disturbed by vessel anchors and ship hulls should arguably have a lower survival rate than those removed more carefully, as will be the case with the port project. Yet monitoring studies have reported an 89% survival of tagged specimens in the West Bay site 2 years following the restoration, compared to 93% of unaffected coral colonies. But rather than joining with us to ensure that environmental mitigation works effectively, our opponents seem now just to want to decry those mitigation efforts and tell us that they will not be successful. In my view, Mr. Speaker, exactly the same coral species in the same vicinity, relocated by the same teams, provides the best evidence of likelihood of success for this project. This is not, Mr. Speaker, by any means meant to underestimate the significant challenges involved in carrying out a coral relocation project at the scale envisaged in Georgetown Harbor. It is clear that the proposed coral relocation will never completely mitigate the ecological impacts of the port improvements. However, the experiences both locally and elsewhere can help us as we meet those challenges drawing on the experience of what has worked and what has failed here in Cayman and around the world. There is every reason, as I have said, to be confident that the same experts who have been so successful in relocating coral in Cayman previously will be able to develop and implement an equally successful coral relocation plan for this project. Pardon me, Mr. Speaker, my voice is starting to fail. We should be confident that they can achieve high survival rates and that they will help us to achieve the plan's aim of no net loss of biodiversity, which is in keeping with the overall goals stated in the Cayman Islands National Biodiversity Action Plan 2009. Indeed, the project will include a coral nursery as part of its coral recovery plan, so as to grow and transplant coral onto local reefs that are being degraded. Mr. Speaker, the last issue of substance for the decision on whether the country should move forward with building new cruise berthing and enhanced cargo facilities is the question of financing and affordability. The upfront costs of building the new cruise berths and enhanced cargo facilities amount to $200 million. All of that will be paid for by Verdant Isle, the successful bidder. There will be no government cash contribution, no government borrowing or bonds, and no government guarantees. The entire cost and all the risk sits with Verdant Isle partners. They make their money back from the per passenger tax that is levied on all cruise ships calling at Grand Cayman. And so, Mr. Speaker, I introduce the first piece of misleading information about the finances that is touted by our opponents. According to CPR and even some in the opposition, they calculate that the total income that Verdant Isle partners will receive over their 25-year tenure will be $450 million. I will not quibble with that calculation, so let's just accept it for the purposes of this discussion. They then express their indignation that a private sector entity will be receiving $450 million in income when the build cost is only $200 million. The $250 million extra sounds like a massive profit flowing into the hands of the business partners in the consortium. Mr. Speaker, the first issue with our opponent's argument is that they are conveniently forgetting that the contract also requires Verdant Isle partners to maintain the new facilities for the next 25 years. It is estimated that the maintenance costs are likely to total around $75 million in that period. That reduces the surplus to $175 million. That still sounds like an awful lot of profit to make, though, doesn't it? Well, actually, no. $175 million over 25 years equates to $7 million a year. Against an upfront capital investment of $200 million, that equates to an annual return of just 3.5%. Again, this assumes that the $450 million is correct. If the partners in Verdant Isle were just looking to make money on an investment, they would do better just lending their money out on the markets. They would get a better return. Do not forget as well that the $200 million projected cost includes the vital cargo port enhancements. The other issue raised by our opponents is that they claim the Cayman people will be paying for the new facilities. The basis for that claim is as follows. The amount of the passenger tax that Verdant Isle will receive is mostly a replacement for the tender fees that the cruise companies will no longer be paying. However, in order to make the overall financial model work, the government is reducing the amount per passenger it receives by a small amount. That is absolutely true. The amount that was discussed previously by the ministry was US $2.32 per passenger. However, this amount was based on the original design option that would cost some $229 million. The option that we have actually chosen to move ahead with, Mr. Speaker, is one that will cost just under $200 million. Thus, we do expect that the final per passenger cost, once the final contract numbers are agreed, should be less than $2.32 per passenger. So, on the basis of those facts, Mr. Speaker, our opponents have concluded that Cayman is therefore losing out financially. Mr. Speaker, that's completely and utterly incorrect. What we are giving up is income that we would not have unless the project goes ahead. To understand this, remember the point I made at the very beginning. If we build the new cruise berths, the number of passengers goes up. If we do not build the new berths, the number of visitors to these islands will decline. Put very simply, the government's total income is greater if the project goes ahead. It will be greater than we get now and much greater than if we do not build the new berths. The reason is that we are getting a slightly lower amount per passenger, but the increased number of passengers means our total income goes up. Ask any Caymanian whether they would rather sell 20 mangoes for $6 each or have 25 mangoes that they can sell for $5 each. For the benefit of members opposite, 20 mangoes at $6 each yield an income of $120. While 25 mangoes at $5 each yields $125. Would any Caymanian think that in the latter case they were better off because their total income was higher, or that they were losing out by giving up $1 per mango? If our opponents think that 20 mangoes for $6 each is the better option, I invite them to come and buy their produce solar from my farm. Mr. Speaker, I have heard it said that the financing sounds too good to be true. Someone else builds Cayman the new cruise berths and enhanced cargo facilities it needs. They are willing to fund the project entirely themselves with no contribution or guarantee from the government. The total income to government from passenger tax goes up. Throughout the build and operation of the new facilities, the port stays the property of the Cayman people, and it will continue to be operated by the Port Authority. There has to be a catch, right? Wrong. There is no catch. This has been achieved because the government, my government, has been willing to go to the market positively and confidently, negotiating from strength in order to secure the kind of solution that has never been seen in the cruise industry before. Bidders were willing to take part in the procurement on those terms because of the strength of the Cayman offer to cruise visitors. Cruise passengers enjoy coming to Cayman and they want to continue to do so. The only barrier is the logistical one caused by the lack of berthing facilities. The model is attractive to the two cruise companies that anchor the consortium, not because they will make money from the port itself, but because keeping Cayman on their schedules helps them to sell cruises. That is where they make their money out of this. Mr. Speaker, I confess that in some ways, this referendum can be seen to be an unnecessary distraction. However, as I said earlier, I respect the work that has gone into gathering the necessary signatures and a referendum we will have. In some ways, though, this is a fitting debate for our country to be having. As a people, we need to decide the direction that our islands will take in the decades to come. In doing so, let us reflect on what our people have achieved over the 60 years since we first gained a measure of self-government with the granting of our first written constitution. No doubt there were people then saying that Cayman should remain the islands that time forgot. But there were others, Mr. Speaker, who were not content to leave things the way they were. People who wanted to improve the quality of life for Caymanians. They were willing to put in place the legal frameworks that brought the first banking and finance businesses to Cayman. They were willing to balance some loss of environmental amenity to build our airport and then, yes, our existing cargo port, to welcome hotel developers and to invest in the necessary infrastructure to allow these islands to grow. Alongside those pioneers, some now recognized as our national heroes, the Caymanian spirit of enterprise and entrepreneurship meant our people founded and grew the businesses that could take advantage of the new economic opportunities that presented themselves. Mr. Speaker, I believe that spirit is still alive and thriving in these islands. Our people are not waiting for the government to come up with answers to questions about where tourists will go and what will they do. The government will play our part, as we do, but Caymanians will exploit the opportunities and create the businesses that answer those questions for themselves. This is what occurred, Mr. Speaker, after the wharf on Iron Shore was converted into a modern cargo dock facility in 1977. A cargo dock that has served us well and has been expanded over the years, but that is again in need of expansion. But, Mr. Speaker, as you well know, the Georgetown Port Project that was opened in 1977 was controversial in its time. There were those who, like some opponents today, lack vision and do not appreciate the need to modernize and improve our infrastructure. Some of that history, Mr. Speaker, was captured in a supplement published by the Nor'Wester magazine on the 16th of July 1977 to celebrate the completion of the Georgetown Port Project. Mr. Speaker, I ask the indulgence of your good self to lay a copy of this supplement on the table of this House and to recite a few words from it that mention the comments made by the late Berkeley Bush, Mr. Berkeley, as we all called him, who was the EXCO member responsible for building the port. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Berkeley and his entire government, the government from 1972 to 1976, lost their seats in the elections in 1976. But Mr. Berkeley was invited by the new EXCO member, Captain Charles Cockernell, to speak at the opening of the Georgetown Port Project in July of 1977. Quoting from the article, Mr. Speaker, the reporter says, in his speech, Mr. Bush outlined the history leading up to the construction of the port facility. Although he had been a central figure with his drive, determination, and enthusiasm in getting the port project started, he summed up the part he played by saying, there was a job to be done and someone had to do it, and I just happened to be that man. The ceremony also gave Mr. Bush an obviously welcome opportunity to answer his critics who had carped about the facility and its positioning for many years. With obvious relish, he pointed out to those who had said it was utter stupidity to build in Georgetown because of Nor'Westers that the dock had survived 2 seasons of Nor'Westers while under construction. To those who had pointed out that the island had done all right with just the Iron Shore during the boom period, and why therefore was a dock facility needed, he wondered where the country would end up if such prophets of doom were in the driver's seat. To those who had said he had lost his seat in the Legislative Assembly because of his involvement with the dock and insistence that it be in Georgetown, he replied in ringing tones that he would rather have the dock facility and have it in Georgetown than occupy every seat in the Legislative Assembly representing people who did not want the port. End quote. That, Mr. Speaker, is the measure of a statesman. Mr. Speaker, I want to mention another recorded statement from that supplement, that of Captain Charles Colonel, who spoke after Mr. Berkeley. Quoting from the article again, Captain Charles also pointed out that a gateway to larger and more up-to-date cargo ships had been opened and would link the islands with international terminals. This was bound to result in savings to the consumer. The manner in which cargo was handled on the old wharf had caused damage and losses to imported goods, which naturally forced prices to rise, unquote. Mr. Speaker, I thank God, and we all should. We had representatives like Berkeley Bush and Captain Charles Colonel in those times who had the vision, foresight, and fortitude to push through even controversial projects like the cargo port, and who understood the need and benefit of vital infrastructure projects. In this case, a modern cargo port facility that has benefited the country and our people hugely over the past 42 years. I do believe, Mr. Speaker, although I won't be around, that 40 years hence, those who occupy these hallowed halls will recognize that the building of the proposed cruise berthing and enhanced cargo port was similarly significant for the future development and success of our islands and our people. And Mr. Speaker, they may undoubtedly state how glad they are that the prophets of doom had failed to stop the project by way of this referendum. Mr. Speaker, the question on the ballot paper at this referendum is about cruise berthing and enhanced cargo facilities. The question for the country is whether we still have the confidence in ourselves and in our future to grasp the opportunities before us, the opportunities to start new businesses, the opportunities to improve still further our world-class Cayman-Kind cruise tourism offer, and yes, Mr. Speaker, the opportunity to show we can deliver a world-leading coral relocation program. Mr. Speaker, I and my government believe in a strong and prosperous future for these islands. I believe in opening the door to economic opportunity, not slamming the door on the jobs of the hundreds of Caymanians whose livelihoods depend on cruise visitors. Finally, I believe, Mr. Speaker, that the majority of Caymanians believe as I and my government do. The referendum gives them the chance to show their confidence in themselves and in a prosperous future. The choice facing the people of these islands on the 19th of December is a clear one. On the one hand, we can choose to move forward with building our new cruise berthing and enhanced cargo port facilities. If we do so, we guarantee that cruise ships will continue to bring their visitors to Grand Cayman, and in so doing, we safeguard existing jobs and create more employment and business opportunities for Caymanians. The enhanced cargo facilities will mean that the port can handle bigger ships and more cargo and more efficiently, and this helps drive down the costs of all the goods we import. This redevelopment of our tired and inefficient cargo port can only be funded because it is being linked with our new cruise berths. Cayman can choose to move forward with building our new cruise berthing and enhanced cargo port facilities. We can, Mr. Speaker, and we should choose prosperity. On the other hand, we could turn our backs on the redevelopment of our port. As cruise ships grow in size, they will increasingly pass by Cayman on their way to other destinations that have the facilities needed to cope with their passengers. Visitor numbers in Cayman will fall. Caymanians will lose their jobs and their businesses will fail. We could try to make do with cargo facilities that are already too small to meet our current needs, let alone meet the needs of a growing population. We could choose decline. The deal the government has negotiated with Virgin Isle partners ensures that no government funding is required to build the dock, but the facilities remain in our ownership. Increased visitor numbers mean total revenue to government increases, so we can afford to continue funding other things like schools and road improvements. There is no financial risk to Cayman, its government, or its people. The government has responded to people's environmental concerns, and the redesign of the port development has significantly reduced the environmental impact of the project. There is no dredging in Hogstye Bay and no risk to 7 Mile Beach. There will be damage to existing marine environments, but millions of dollars will be invested to relocate coral, and we aim to achieve no net loss of biodiversity. The government has done all it can to safeguard Cayman's economic future while minimizing any environmental impact from Cayman's port redevelopment. Mr. Speaker, prosperity or decline? This government chooses prosperity for this and future generations of Caymanians. We must get on and move forward with building the cruise berthing and enhanced cargo facilities that help to secure that future prosperity. I ask all members of this Honorable House to vote aye to this referendum bill, and that those Caymanians who go out to the polls on referendum day, I ask them to vote a resounding yes to the question, should the Cayman Islands continue to move forward with building the cruise berthing and enhanced cargo port facility? I thank you, Mr. Speaker. God bless these beautiful Cayman Islands.
Does any other member wish to speak? The Honorable, the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I guess it has fallen my lot to respond to the government's position on this referendum law. Therefore, before I start into the meat of my debate, I would like to point out something especially for the listening public. And that is that the difference between the government and the opposition lies entirely in how we prepare our speeches. The government has the resources to engage speech writers who have in their possession the ability of flowery language. And I don't mean F-L-O-U-R, but sometimes you wonder if you're not blinded by that. We, on the other hand, Mr. Speaker, have to do our own research, as has always been the case in this country. We have not yet to mature to the point where the opposition gets resources, financial resources, to engage its own people like research people and speechwriters. So I, in advance, ask for forgiveness for all of us on this side if we do not come across as flowery as the government has been. Mr. Speaker, I rise obviously to offer contribution on behalf of the opposition in this debate that is before us. This very controversial bill that is before this honorable House, entitled Referendum, People-Initiated Referendum Regarding the Port Bill 2019. Now, Mr. Speaker, the Premier has said so much here this morning that it appears like we shouldn't even have had to do research and prepare, because he has said enough for us to be able to debate for a lifetime. Anyway, Mr. Speaker, it's kind of difficult to decide where to begin, because controversial seems like an understatement, especially since the developments over the weekend. Just when I thought we were going to be able to have a straight debate, in comes the circulation of an opinion which evidently was requested by CPR, which brings yet another twist to bear. May I add, that opinion raises many of the matters that the opposition had similar thoughts on. Mr. Speaker, I certainly do not know at this stage where that opinion is and whether or not it has yet been laid, if a writ has been filed with the courts. Therefore, I will be very circumspect in my referrals thereto. Mr. Speaker, what should be one of the most historical days of our political history has unfortunately turned into one of the most contemptuous and divisive periods of our lifetime. It should have been historical. The people of this country should have been celebrating that, because this is the first time that they have en masse and legally exercised their right to be involved in the governance of their country. Long may that last. Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, again, or fortunately, whichever it may be, this government can take claim for most of that division that has occurred over the last year on this very important project. Because, Mr. Speaker, the government's response to the wishes of the people has been somewhat cavalier. So much so, Mr. Speaker, that the whole country has become disconnected. And I am hearing it, the people are questioning the utility of participating in the democratic process any longer, even at election time. I have become extremely concerned about that, Mr. Speaker. But when a country becomes so disconnected as we are today, this Cayman Islands, so divided, any government has to stop and take stock. They have to ask themselves, what have we done to cause this? And how can we correct the dissension among the people that we were elected to serve? Mr. Speaker, this government in the last year on this particular subject has demonstrated what is seemingly a belief that they know best once they're elected. Mr. Speaker, that is a misconception, because those who know what they want for their country are outside of here, in the majority. There's only 19 of us in here. And those outside, collectively, know much more than we do. Mr. Speaker, I've often wondered in recent times what happened to by the people and for the people. Have we forgotten that? Mr. Speaker, the people have been, monies has been used by this government over the last year, and more so in recent 6 months. Almost in a manner that we chastise our children, at least when I was growing up. It appears like we want to beat them over the head and beat sense into the people who we purport to serve. It appears like we want to beat them into submission. May I suggest, Mr. Speaker, that that approach is contrary to the real democracy that we swore to defend and protect. The real flesh and blood that we swore. We took oaths in this honorable House to protect them and to defend them and to adhere to their wishes. And sometimes their wishes are contrary to what we believe, but it is our responsibility to sit them down and explain to them what and why it has to be done in the manner that is contrary to how they believe it should be done. Mr. Speaker, one of my greatest knowledge enhancement was when I walked into these hallowed halls. And I am sure others who have been here, in particular the new ones in recent times, will tell you, and your good self too, Mr. Speaker, that after you get here is when you realize that what you were saying outside is not so. So you have to adjust. Therefore, the people on the outside do not know how these things operate, so we have to carry them along with us. Mr. Speaker, there seems to be a rising tide worldwide of people demanding a listening ear from their government. We here in Cayman is no different. But what we should do here in Cayman is be thankful that our people thus far have not taken their demands as far as others have. Nevertheless, this government is seemingly dismissing the people who are asking them to explain their actions and how it will affect their future, and more so their children's future. Mr. Speaker, firstly, the government rejected a motion by Mr. Miller and I to have a referendum which was tabled in September in Kim Bryan. Next, they dismissed those who called for more information, and when there was no response, they started a petition, the result of which we are today debating. Mr. Speaker, the Premier says that they are now providing a booklet, despite him saying there was sufficient information available for the people of this country to make a decision. He's just said that. Mr. Speaker, I wonder why we're making the booklet then. I recall when we did the referendum, 2007, 8, 9, we had information throughout the country, booklets, which culminated in one big booklet as to what the Constitution would entail after the negotiations. Mr. Speaker, we can't do it after the fact. Too little, too late. People have already made up their minds. And if the government is so convinced that the cruise facility is that important, is not going to adversely impact this country environmentally and otherwise, then they should have been doing this a long time ago. Mr. Speaker, the government then dismissed the possibility of the petition reaching the threshold of 25%. I heard them. It will never happen. Then the government says that it should not take a year. That may be true, Mr. Speaker, but I do know those people had a lull in their campaign to get and drive to get more signatures. Mr. Speaker, the Premier just said, if there was the law, which I call for, and I'll talk about that, if there was a law, the time period to reach that 25% threshold would probably be maximum 6 months. Who's to say they weren't going to get it? We can come up with the most creative. Let me say creative. I was going to say a word that starts with E and end with N-I-N-E. Who's to say that the people wouldn't have gotten it? Who's to say that the people were not angry enough to come out in masses and sign it? We are we have always taken advantage of the passiveness of the people of this country. That is precisely why we are here debating today, a people initiated referendum. And they need to stop it. And they need to stop it. Because in the day that I was growing up, Mr. Speaker, and your good self, I know many Caymanians who were not as passive. And so does everyone else. Well, those who are a little older, like the Premier and the member from Kimon-Brack, the Deputy Premier, and my good friend behind me. Mr. Speaker, I keep talking. I said earlier at the introduction of this, my speech, that we keep putting out this flowery language. They wouldn't have gotten it. They're going back and taking that 1 year and extrapolating that it took that 1 year, so if it was 6 months, it wouldn't have been reached. You can't do that. That's not fair. Mr. Speaker, we don't know the underlying wishes of the people of this country. We don't know. And as such, we must be cognizant of their wishes and give them the right to exercise it. Mr. Speaker, then, upon the threshold being reached, the authenticity was then questioned and a house-to-house verification commenced. Really? Then, Mr. Speaker, the Premier says that CPR had all kind of tactics to get people on to the referendum, to sign the petition. Mr. Speaker, I don't know. Like the Premier, I'm a lot out into the community. Also, I watch these young, relatively young anyhow, Caymanians who are from good, decent family, like them old people talk about. I know where they come from. Mr. Speaker, not once during that entire period did I ever think that there were any tactics being used by those young people to try and get people's signature, people to sign that petition. Not once. Mr. Speaker, what I do know is that every one of them, knew they would rue the day that their parents or their family knew they were doing something like that. They know that. Mr. Speaker, I have more questions about the members in here than I have about them when it comes to this petition. But yet, we do everything. And Mr. Speaker, we come in to some of the hypocrisy in this place over the last few years. The government wasn't satisfied with that, Mr. Speaker. Sending, what the fella name? Howell, Mr. Howell, chasing elusive dreams, hoping that they could unverify everybody. Mr. Speaker, government wasn't satisfied with that. We then saw the government promoting the on-verification by those who had signed the petition, encouraging people to go on and on-verify their own name. Really? As far as I know, only 3 people did. 2? Well, that close enough for 3. Mr. Speaker, a little later on in my prepared thing, I'm going to talk about how some of us talk about fairness inside these very hallowed halls. Mr. Speaker, I tell you, I don't have any speech with that flowery language to follow. This is about advocating on behalf of the people and stopping, reminding the government of a behavior that is unbecoming. Can't do this to your people. I don't care where they come from, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that wasn't enough. All those things wasn't enough. They then announced the preferred bidder, again showing their arrogance that they're moving ahead, regardless of what the people say. Then they proceed to allow some of those financiers from the cruise industry to come into the country to do the job of explaining to the people what the project entails.
That's the real bosses.
A job that they alone, Mr. Speaker, were elected to do. I did a press conference then asking those people if they understand the Foreign Corrupt Act in America. Mr. Speaker, a job that is wholly and solely the responsibility of the governments. They bring in people from America to dabble in the politics of this country. And I don't want to hear that they're a company here. Until a contract has been signed, they have no business in this country. In the meantime, Mr. Speaker, we got legitimate Caymanian companies here can't get work permit. Really? Really? Mr. Speaker, without any disrespect, see all them up there? They're all in Cayman company businesses, everyone of them. And it's challenging for them to get work permit, but the government bring these people in who does not have a contract under the guise they're the preferred bidder and they know more than we do. We're proposing this project, but they're going to explain it to you. Mr. Speaker, if that is not a case of total, absolute disrespect for the people of this country, I don't know what is. And I don't know if not the laws. The Attorney General will have to, in his debate, because I bring none out. I only got debate there today, and talk about it and want to walk late and finish this today. More than me got have debate. I promise on that. Mr. Speaker, this is not about, it's gone past the dock now. Because obviously, it is up to the people to deal with that. This is this disrespect that this government has for the people of this country. And I can demonstrate it, I can show it, I'm going to prove it. You know what they say in East End? Don't rush nothing, everybody got to get their little piece. Mr. Speaker, a job that the government was supposed to do, they haven't performed. I want to know, what is it the government is afraid of? Those same people who elected them, the premiers, in 2017, they are afraid to face them. Go on the radio and shut off the phones so they can explain, under the guise that they explain. Yeah? I don't have that privilege. I'm taken on every day, and I answer truthfully. Mr. Speaker, these are the same people, that government is going to go to in less than 2 years' time and ask them to return them to power. Really? Why would the people return you all to power? To abuse them the same way you have been doing in these last 6 years? And we get into that too, about this thing called mandate. Since I'm going to talk about on the lawyers, mandate this. Then, Mr. Speaker, we hear about the financiers, the people from the Cruise Association in Florida who I just spoke about, that come here and explain to the people. And they send me or my people a text at 1:47 in the afternoon to meet that evening. Meet for what? Meet for what? Really? Me? Mr. Speaker, I'm wide open to meeting with them. And colleagues, I'm wide open to meeting with them. But it's not about the dock. I want to meet with them to do the job that the government hasn't done, which is to find out when they are going to give our tour operators at least 50% of what they sell our tours on the passenger liners. That's what I want. I'll meet with them tomorrow, today, late tonight too. I'll tie a light around my head and go meet with them. But that's what we're going to talk about. We ain't talking about that dock. It's not their business. They are engaged to build it, if they do get that. You know what I writ that is threatening? Let's stop here about it. Not only that, Mr. Speaker, all of us have our opinions on this thing. And I respect all of the members. They'll get up and say their thing. Mr. Speaker, the government wasn't satisfied with that. They now bring them in, do job fairs. Job fair? For jobs that started at 900, now down to 200? With a legitimate government department. Work will be added to. Maybe the deputy governor needs to look into that and find out if that's legitimate. A foreign company
No work permit.
No contract. Maybe a registered company here. I haven't double checked that yet because you gotta go to the registered offices. And the deputy governor, tell you everybody gotta get a piece. The deputy governor is sitting down here, and I can't say that he didn't object to it, but what I do know, I didn't hear any objections. And the deputy governor, and whether he has or not, I am now imploring him to look into that to see if there's any legitimacy to it.
The immigration law clearly says they can't get politics.
I hope they remember the
Is this a convenient point, honorable member,
speaker.
to break?
I was just getting in some juicy stuff, but
It sounds like a good time to break then.
thank you, sir.
The House will suspend for lunch until 2:30. Before we leave, the listening persons in the audience, persons who come visiting us today, are reminded that when they enter, they are to recognize the chair. On leaving, it's the same procedure. Thank you very much.